a couple of people, they said, "What's Delta 8? What are you talking about? I don't know that." And I explained that what was happening, and this was news to them, and they were not excited about it. They were, "Oh my goodness, this is going to poison the industry because it's going to cause the backlash that we're already seeing from the DEA and in different states." So that is a challenging topic. I encourage people to take whatever risk they're capable of taking and get their own legal advice and figure out how to figure out distribution on that. But I don't see that as a viable, even short or medium term opportunity.
Hey guys, it's Mandi with the Global Hemp Association. I wanted to say thank you very, very much for joining. I'm really excited to have you, to have an opportunity to meet so many people. Again, if you like our content and like what we're producing, please like, share, comment, subscribe. You'll meet so many amazing people with all of the interviews that we've done. They're available on our YouTube channel and on Patreon.
Anyways, thank you so much, Robert, for joining. I'm really excited to have you on. I'm excited to talk about a little bit of your experience. If you wouldn't mind giving a quick intro to our listeners, for those of you that are chiming in or that are listening or do catch this later on, if you do like the content, please share or leave a comment and note, and we'll make sure that we'll get back to you. Okay, I'll turn it over to you now, Robert.
Well, Mandi, thanks for having me on. I'm much appreciated, and I've followed what you've been doing with this podcast and otherwise, and I admire your hustle and just the information that you're putting out there, which is so critical. My background is I became licensed as an attorney in 2001. By about 2008, I had tried dozens of cases. I was a commercial litigator. I left and started my own law firm from a large firm that I was with. That firm, by early 2009, we started to work in the cannabis industry. And when I say cannabis, I mean hemp and marijuana. I'm talking about the plant. So we started working with marijuana producers first, right? We started to open up dispensaries with clients with very aggressive strategies in Colorado and up and down the West Coast. And then as things moved across the East Coast, and in late 2009, one of my really good friends called me, and he worked for a company called Nordic Naturals, a large fish oil company. Well, their sales staff was going to a company called Cannabis. And Cannabis at that time was part of a group owned with Hemp Meds, which are separate companies now, CV Sciences and Canaway. And they were importing something called CBD. Now, I'd heard of CBD, but I had no idea at that point in time the legality of it, never thought about it. I was too busy working on state-specific marijuana regulations. So we started to work with those two folks. We developed some legal strategies. Their sales went from the hundreds of thousands of dollars to the millions of dollars, quite literally overnight. And then we began to represent really most of the main players in the CBD industry by about 2010, 2011. My law firm's the Hoban Law Group. We have 14 offices across the U.S. and 6 offices outside the U.S. All we do is work in the cannabis industry, and we're really proud of it. About half our work's hemp-related, half our work's marijuana-related, and it's probably equally divided across the U.S. and international because this is an international industry. So it's really, really exciting. As a lawyer in particular, I can't think of a more interesting or exciting thing to practice. Now, we also formed a consulting firm in 2009 called Gateway Proven Strategies, GPS.global. GPS does projects all over the world, turnkey projects. People come to GPS and they say, I've got X number of dollars. I want to create a company in this space. We do everything for them. We build their executive team. We select their genetics. We build their farm team. We literally build their extraction facility and their business development sales staff. And we turn the company back over to them after about 1.5 to 2 years. So that's pretty exciting stuff as well. But what is going on in the hemp industry is something that changes almost every week, as you well know.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, you say you do everything, right? Where has the big push been, and where do you see it really moving as far as opportunity on your side and then for the industry in general, right?
So,
we say
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So where's it been? There's really two tracks when you say where's it been. There's the legal track, and then there's what the market has demanded and what the producers make. I'll try to run those two down. So legally, we started to see, as I pointed out, before 2014, hemp CBD producers in the United States, all that material was being imported. At the beginning, it was being imported from China by way of Europe. That product was very problematic from CBD perspective because it had elevated levels of THC, but it also had high levels of pesticides and heavy metals, right? So then we started to see more and more production come out of the European Union. So then that was being imported into the United States. Importing into the United States was no easy feat, by the way, at that point in time as well, because most of these plants, while they fell outside the definition of marijuana under federal law, hemp wasn't defined at the time. So there really wasn't, this was a risky and an aggressive strategy. By 2014, we saw the Farm Bill, the first Farm Bill come around. For the first time in US history, identified industrial hemp as a legal concept and said that you can enter into market-based research. And the notion was if you can do market-based research, then you can sell products and create a market. That's when the industry began to explode. We sued the DEA in 2016 and got a favorable ruling about the scope of the 2014 Farm Bill. And then the industry exploded even more, the CBD industry. And then legally, of course, in 2018, our former president signed the Farm Bill, which removed all research limitations on industrial hemp and its derivatives, removed it explicitly from the controlled substances ranks to the extent that it was already in the CSA, which is debatable. But we're still waiting for FDA regulations. We've got final USDA regulations, which are in process, but we don't have FDA. The FDA is currently trying to gather information about what the industry is all about. What are the specs on the products? Is it safe? Are the producers really producing something that doesn't, surreptitiously get people high, so forth and so on? This is the fundamental basic level that the FDA is at. So that's the legal track. Now, where were we from a marketplace perspective? We started to see CBD become the cash product from the hemp plant. Early days, 2009, 2010, 2011. By 2014, we started to hear people 2015, talk about CBG, the mother of all cannabinoids, CBN. That was the product that people were focused on for the better part of 18 to 36 months. Then we started to see this movement towards hemp flower, especially in states that didn't have any form of a marijuana program, right? It was a niche product. It still might be. The jury's out on how viable the hemp flower industry is, particularly when some states have cracked down on selling hemp flower. And now, what's the topic of the day? Delta 8 and then Delta 10 and everything else. So there's a lot of really thorny issues, but that's where the market has driven producers and manufacturers towards cash revenue streams. The USDA regs, I might add, though, do encourage multi-purpose crops. Everything I just talked about is based on a single purpose, high cannabinoid crop, feminized plants that cost $10,000 to $15,000 per acre for input cost. So we're looking at a tri-crop and in part because we have so much of that feminized crop still sitting in the field from 2 years ago. From a market-based perspective, farmers need to plant something that is a multi-purpose, versatile crop. It's been said that 2021 is the year of fiber. We're starting to see that. It's planting season, so we're seeing fiber crops go in the ground. And by the way, it's interesting because you plant that much more densely. You use certified genetics. You don't use these feminized seeds that cost $1 to $5 per seed. You buy seed by the pound like any other industry. And furthermore, it costs about $500 to $700 per acre to grow that. And you can grow hundreds or thousands of acres accordingly. So that's sort of the legal and the evolution of the market over the last 10 plus years as I've witnessed it. Who knows where it goes next?
It's definitely interesting as I'm out talking to people, what people think about and where I see the industry actually moving, right? What they're aware of. Talk to me about the multi-purpose crops and dual purpose crops. So
Sure.
what are you seeing and explain that a little bit for those that may not be listening or may not understand.
Yeah, so I mean, as I sort of trace that history, if you will, the recent history, most of those early uses required farmers to plant high cannabinoid varieties. Those cost a lot in terms of genetics. It cost a lot in terms of field preparation and irrigation and so forth and so on, and labor. It costs multiples, exponentially more than planting something that's more of a horticultural style versus an agricultural style of planting. So what I'm talking about when I talk multi-purpose or tri-crop is a horticulture or an agricultural style of planting, meaning that you're buying seed by the pound, you're planting hundreds, if not thousands of acres in the aggregate. You're planting these plants very close together, and you're looking at the aggregate yield. So when I have a plant, so I saw you had Andrew Bishop on recently, and he talks a lot about sort of taking the different parts of the plant and capturing all parts of the value of the plant. That's what I mean by multi-purpose or tri-crop, where if it has grain, you're separating the grain. You're still capturing the cannabinoids, but you're not building your business model, nor is the farmer counting on getting rich off of cannabinoids. He's getting breaking even plus on the grain, or in today's case, a lot of fiber. So we're seeing, and by the way, those varieties, the stabilized, standardized varieties that you plant over hundreds of acres, if not thousands, those are certified varieties under OECD standards, European standards, or ASCA standards in the United States. That protects the farmer. This notion that you can go out and get rich on CBD or cannabinoids or hemp flower, those days are over. It's kind of like if you watch somebody pull a slot machine and they win, and then you think, oh, every time somebody pulls that slot machine, you win. Well, you and I both know that's not the case. So you've got to go to something that's less sexy from a marketplace and a dollar appeal standpoint, but it's far more sustainable. And I think that's where the U.S. is, based on market forces, based on policy, and based on the investors who are coming to the table, who lost their behinds on CBD investments over the last several years. Not just CBD investments, but lab investments, right? When you talk about developing infrastructure for hemp, infrastructure, quote unquote, for the last several years meant building out an extraction facility or a lab. That's one small piece of infrastructure that's required. What about seed conditioning, seed drying, field equipment, processing, decortication? The list goes on and on and on. That's real infrastructure. So we're seeing those pieces come together. I'm sorry.
The harvesting alone, the
100%.
piece alone that was very rarely talked about, or the drying, like you said, was very rarely discussed. And it's a massive piece of our supply chain within the processing. Yeah.
And basic, right? And basic ag stuff. This is where I think I can partly explain why we got off on the foot we did, is because in the early days, the hemp industry was dominated by folks who didn't qualify for one reason or another to participate in the marijuana industry that was legal, or because they had technology that they borrowed from the marijuana industry for extraction. Those folks looked at cultivating industrial hemp like cultivating marijuana, horticultural style, instead of, and harvesting. All of that other stuff didn't matter because you did it all by hand, by and large, in the marijuana industry. So now, to your point, we're at this very basic level where are farmers going to take a fiber or a grain crop? How are you going to get it pelletized and decorticated? That's, believe it or not, pretty exciting stuff when you dig into it.
Oh, it's all I dig into. And it's funny when people that don't get it, they're like, what's wrong with you? So I like talking to people like you that understand, because it's not just coming out of my mouth.
Well, let me tell you, but you faced this too, right? I was at the Southern Hemp Expo down in Franklin, Tennessee, outside of Nashville a few years ago. And I got up and it was 3 years ago, and I did this talk. I said, farmers, you're not going to get rich growing CBD. And this is an exaggeration, but if I could have gotten booed out of the room, I would have gotten booed out of the room. Yeah. I was talking multi-purpose cropping, tri-cropping, and talking to farmers in language that farmers understood, and they didn't want to hear it. They wanted to hear, I'm going to get a bunch of CBD, and I'm going to make 60 grand an acre, and money, money, money. And you can't blame them for that thought, but there was a dose of reality or context that was missing.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think it's just a lie? It was a get-rich scheme. It was this. Do you think they were sold because of the marijuana? I mean, what happened? What was the real breakdown, if you could put your finger on something?
Well, people saw people making lots of money, and there was, and by the way, there still is money to be made in that aspect of the plant. Yes. It's just, back in the day, 8 years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, you could make a lot of money growing just CBD crops because there wasn't that many people doing it. And also, those products were brand new. So while consumer demand is still really high globally, we don't have regulations from the FDA. We have state regs in certain states,
Right.
but we don't have regs from the FDA. What do regs from the FDA do? That opens up shelf space in real stores. And I'm not talking about an end cap that you see in a Kroger store or Smith's. I'm talking about CBD as an ingredient in beverages and eye makeup and everything you could possibly
Main ingredients.
So yeah, as an ingredient, that's 100%. This is CBD, cannabinoids are merely ingredients in other products. The days of selling a tincture bottle that's just CBD, they're probably coming close to an end because that CBD will go into other things. But I also attribute it to the idea that there really is no central clearinghouse of information. Most established industries have a trade group that disseminates information regularly. Not that there's not trade groups, they're just, at that time especially, there wasn't an effective trade group. And arguably there's not terribly effective trade groups right now because it's so fascinated, right? Not because there's not good people that aren't trying. It's just because.
But I think this is an elephant, and this is what I said even in what we're doing, right? Is I say we're a global hemp association, but where we've focused is on a piece that's this big in the industry, right? And I know that like Vote Hemp is very focused on the lobbying and legislation, a U.S. Hemp Roundtable, and there's a number of organizations that do so many great, U.S. Hemp Association, or farmers, right, that are focused very much on farmers. And so there's a number of different organizations that have taken up lanes. But I've described hemp, it's different than any other industry. It's like a technology or a banking. It's in every facet of our lives, and it will be in every facet, right? And so it's got our trade organizations. I'm going to bet 50% of them fold over the next year, or they group up because.
Well, you'd hope that they'd group up because that's the smart thing to do. But I don't have a particular person in mind, or group in mind, but. In this industry, it's highlighted the egotistical nature of my group's better than yours, and you come into mine instead of just joining together. And that's off the charts in this industry, and that's unfortunate because you do need that central clearinghouse. That just to finish that thought, right? That's what happened. So when I saw this guy and this person and this group and this woman making lots of money selling CBD, I said I'm going to go raise money and do the same thing. But there was no place that they could go to learn that there was also 50,000 other people doing the exact same thing.
Bingo.
So when you have 50,000 people, that's an exaggeration, of course, do the exact same thing, you oversaturate a market. That's just basic business. And unfortunately, that's what people were led astray. By the way, it's you don't often think of lawyers going to lawyers for information like that, but our clients did. And the ones that when they came to us 2, 3, and 4 years ago, and I said, look, don't invest in labs. Don't invest in CBD only. Look at where the puck is going, so to speak, not where it is right now, because it won't be there when you get there. The people that sort of blew us off, they're no longer around. And I don't say that with pride. I say that with almost a teary eye, because at the same time, where could they have gone? How else could I or anyone have helped them not just throw money out the door? And there's people that have cashed in 401ks, et cetera, to do that. And they're unfortunately out in the cold. And I wish that didn't happen, but that's also an emerging market.
That's exactly why I started doing this. This is why we post everything. I mean, there was a time just not very long ago, I pulled things off of our YouTube channel because I was going to put them on a different platform where someone bought a subscription. And what it did is went against everything, or every reason as to why I started this, is to provide an opportunity for people to have resources to connect to people exactly like you or like Andrew or anybody else that's in the industry. Southbound Industrial Hemp, I saw them on here, or Rex, hello. So talk to me about opportunities to look for. We've been talking about where the industry's been. Where do you really see opportunity going? I'm curious.
That's a good question. So it depends what you are, right? If you're a farmer, I think the opportunity is to begin to aggregate your resources with others and talk to, co-op is a technical term, but get together with folks and understand that with the right processing equipment nearby, and I don't mean laboratory, cultivation in the field and down the line, you can more than break even and probably generate more than you do off of corn or wheat or other crops right now, not in 2 or 3 or 4 years, right now in terms of the dollars per unit that we're seeing. if you're an investor, invest in the whole plant, invest in the infrastructure surrounding the plant. Will the United States plant hundreds of thousands or even millions, because other crops plant millions of acres in the United States, not hundreds of thousands? Will the U.S. continue to do that for the foreseeable future when our neighbors to the south and all the way down to the tip of Patagonia are growing hemp right now? That remains to be seen, but there is a tremendous incentive because of the versatility of the plant to grow a lot of industrial hemp across the United States for many, many years to come. And it's not drought resistant, as you well know, but it goes a long way towards that. And that's important, particularly as our farmlands get drier. Oh, yeah.
It's very drought tolerant.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to call it.
So that's where I see things going. And you know, I also see the Delta 8 issue is something that, like I said, we have to talk about it. In fact, I was on the phone with my good friends from the European Industrial Hemp Association the other day, talking about a European information session that I'm going to participate in here in July. And I brought up to them, not that this doesn't represent the whole organization, but a couple of people, they said, "What's Delta 8? What are you talking about? I don't know that." And I explained that what was happening, and this was news to them, and they were not excited about it. They were, "Oh my goodness, this is going to poison the industry because it's going to cause the backlash that we're already seeing from the DEA and in different states." So that is a challenging topic. I encourage people to take whatever risk they're capable of taking and get their own legal advice and figure out how to figure out distribution on that. But I don't see that as a viable, even short or medium term opportunity. Why? Not because there's not arguments about its legality. It's because no mainstream store is ever going to put those products on its shelf. And isn't that the goal for every farmer and every aggregator of a commodity, to get as wide distribution as possible? If you're satisfied with gas stations, head shops, and e-commerce, nothing wrong with that. But I don't see that as being a sustainable model for farmers.
I agree with you. Well, and to be honest, I see it as such a small piece. Again, we go back to like, what does the consumer and I guess the general public know, and what's really actually coming, or what opportunities are actually really available. What about like plastics and construction materials, textiles, viable markets? You think it's somewhere where we can actually compete on a global scale, especially in the textile space?
Well, the textile space is dominated by low-cost labor. That's not something the United States has, right? So right. Can we participate in the textile industry with hemp? Certainly. But will it be on a major scale when labor, even to the south of our border, going all the way down, gets less expensive the further south you go? And then that even ignores everything in the strength of Southeast Asia and their textile production industry and the system they have there. But fuels, plastics, I do think the United States will be a leader in innovation. I do believe that the United States has the capability. There are a number of folks in Texas right now looking to capitalize on that. But here's how I see the stages. Number one, you need to get enough biomass. We don't have it. We need to get to 500,000 acres or more of annual production. I believe that we can count on consistently to fill that pipeline so that the infrastructure that creates those types of products can be running 18 hours a day to make it worthwhile.
Okay. Real quick, how many facilities are you talking about? When you say 500,000 acres, what's is that one facility? Is that for what is that fulfilling?
Well, you have to have the facilities within 100 miles plus or minus of a farmer, right? So it's not necessarily going to be multiple facilities. How big are those facilities? But they're expensive because the technology is expensive. So it could be 10 facilities. It could be one, but if you had one, even if you centrally located it, the cost of transportation of biomass undermines the viability of that economic model. So you need that technology close to the farmers. So it remains to be seen whether that's in the next 3 to 5 years, 10 facilities or 100 facilities, or is it going to be oversaturated like the laboratory development we've seen over the last several years? So, but I do see the opportunities. What we're working on right now is very basic stuff. We have to protect farmers. farmers need to understand that what they're going to grow is going to be sold. If it's grain, monetize it on grain. Capture the cannabinoids, capture the fiber, capture everything else that's good about the plant, but don't build your economics around it. Call that stuff your waste product. Monetize your waste as gravy on top of mashed potatoes, in other words, right? Mashed potatoes is always better with gravy, but mashed potatoes are pretty darn good on their own as well. So if your grain or your fiber is your mashed potatoes, the farmers do more than break even in a real environment without tremendous subsidies. And then everything else makes it better. I think you got to make the farmers whole to begin with. You have to prove the model for a couple growing seasons that I can make the farmers whole. And then based on that success, additional investment, R&D capabilities, and aggregation of that technology will lead to us really driving plastics and fuels forward and some other things. I think that's the sequence. You can't just jump right into plastics and biofuels as much as we'd like to, because the farmer, what's in it for the farmers right now? There's not much in it for the farmers unless and until that model's proved for a couple seasons, because they've all been burned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. What about grain? I feel like the U.S. has really missed the shot by a little bit, or missed the target by not really focusing on grain more. What's your opinion, and where do you see big change, especially with regulations coming down federally for feed and for cattle and or ourselves?
Well, first of all, any farmer can feed their animals whatever they want within reason, right? But hemp grain is not necessarily certified by the regulatory bodies that oversee cattle feed, chicken feed, so forth and so on. We're in that process. In fact, Colorado State's very involved in that process with the Hemp Feed Coalition, and a great person in this industry, Hunter Buffington, who's sort of leading that effort in many ways. But there's a lot of things that need to happen. Montana farmers, Montana is grain country. That is grain country USA. Not to say other parts of the U.S. are not, but it's ideally situated for industrial hemp too because of its latitude. So with that in mind, when will the Montana farmers stop thinking they're going to get rich growing CBD? I think that's already occurred, but that's what's going to drive U.S. produced grain. Have we missed the boat? I don't think we've missed it. But remember, if I'm going to go to a smoothie store and get an additive in there, they're still going to offer me chia before they ever offer me hemp grain, because the cost of chia is so much lower per unit than it is for hemp. So the pricing needs to work itself out. But what I am seeing is I've been in Paraguay a few times over the last few months.
Okay.
Paraguay is very much a breadbasket, if you will, for Brazil and Argentina. Rich agricultural history and rich in agricultural functioning. They're looking at industrial hemp for grain as sort of the baseline, and they can grow a lot of it with high yields very quickly. So did we miss the market? I don't think we missed it. It's just we need to grow more of it. We need to standardize it. We need to get consumers to understand that this is a viable alternative, and we need to get the price down. Victory Hemp doesn't want me to say we should get the price down, but because it's worth what it's being paid right now, but we need to get the price down for it to compete with other grains.
Well, to get it into consumers' hands, right? To get more consumers to buy it, because like it or not, consumers are not going to buy it. I mean, I got into it with a girlfriend of mine over a plastic bag and paying a penny more for a plastic bag. And I was like, it's exactly the mentality that we're up against, is a penny. And the difference that makes for organizations that are buying millions of bags. I get it. It adds up, right? So how do we avoid this, or what do we do to prevent this or get through this chicken and egg? I mean, it's a constant conversation of, we need the processing to drive down the price, and we need the demand to fulfill to drive down the price or to get the processing, and one won't buy until they know they have the demand or the supply, and the other can't build until they have the purchase. And so talk to me about that. What do we do?
You need that infrastructure, right? So what are farmers used to doing? They're used to planting something that already has a commitment before that even goes into the ground. We're not there with hemp yet for a variety of reasons. The market reasons we just talked about, but also what we talked about. There's not infrastructure. If I'm going to grow for grain, Who's going to process my grain? There is infrastructure, but it's not widespread. If I'm going to grow for fiber, who's going to take fiber? Right. So, and then how am I going to get that contract in advance? So I think infrastructure, and coupled with the consumer education, which creates demand for broader based hemp. There's still pockets of the United States that wouldn't touch a hemp product because they think it's illegal, or, oh, that's just that hippie stuff. Well, that's a stigma. There's nothing wrong with that. But that is a stigma to mainstream America to say, I'm not going to touch that plant. Why would I use hemp grain for protein? Isn't that going to get me high? People don't know basic questions like that, unfortunately. So things like what you're doing are critically important. But I think it's infrastructure, which leads to consumer demand, coupled with consumer demand, which will lead to farmers potentially getting contracts, standardized pricing. And I don't think we're but 2 to 4 years away from that. I really don't, because hemp fits squarely within the Biden administration's regenerative agriculture goals and carbon sequestration goals. So if farmers aren't looking at hemp for a variety of sources, and that's an important point to consider. It's not just how much I can make off of what I grow. It's if I'm growing something, is that doing something beneficial to the environment, which provides it a tax incentive or otherwise? Those incentives exist today for industrial hemp. Go get them.
Well, and the increased yields on other crops.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, like you said, what you're making in the crop that's being grown. It's all of these others. It's awesome. So what type of regulations are you seeing, or where do you see things really moving? There's a lot of discussion in our group about zones for this conversation specifically, especially in counties that are heavy for high resin hemp plants.
Well, so there's regulations are all over the board. When you talk about regulations, I think of two big topics, right? I think of who's going to regulate CBD and what's that going to look like. I'll comment on that. But the other one, which you just raised as it relates to farmers that are growing, sticky, icky crops, right? What about the pollen drift issue? What about regs there, right?
Yes.
We've seen marijuana plants be contaminated time and time again. But as a lawyer, you have to think about, how could I ever prove that? There are ways, by the way, to attempt to prove that. But how can I prove if I'm the marijuana farmer and you're growing, standard certified industrial hemp, and you pollinate my plants and ruin my yield or my potency at both? How do I prove that it came from your farm? There are ways to get there, but that effectively becomes circumstantial evidence, and that's not a great case to take to court because it's spending money on a bet, and you'd rather spend money on your business than on lawyers, and I think we would all agree on that. So there's that issue. What's the right buffer zone? Is it a mile? Or is it 200 miles? We've seen studies that show that pollen drift can go enormous distances. So that's an issue. And what if you're growing just standard industrial hemp and you pollinate, to your point, a feminized field of industrial hemp? So those are real issues that need real solutions, and departments of ag are trying their best. And that's led to what we saw in Humboldt County in California, where them saying no one's allowed to plant hemp here. Why? Not because they don't like hemp, because they don't want to risk the marijuana plant, whether that's black market, illicit market, traditional market, whatever you want to call it, or commercial market to be impacted. And then also when I think about regs, what does the future of CBD or cannabinoid regulation look like? Delta 8's not helping us with that discussion, but I can tell you we built in Colorado the very first state-based hemp derivative regulatory structure through our state equivalent of the FDA called the CDPHE, the Department of Public Health and Environment. They adopted, based on our consistent and persistent lobbying, a hemp foods policy. If it comes out of the hemp plant and if it's under 0.3% in a finished product, it's regulated like any other food. See, I think that's good policy.
Yeah.
That's basic. But
and that's what makes sense. This is something a long time ago that really struck me. When I go to a grocery store and I buy a can of soup, I know what's in that can of soup. It's past all of the regulations or specs to be safe and consumable, right? That didn't exist. And so it makes sense that we would implement those same basic standards or regulations that would, again, make give the consumers, I guess, some security to know that what they're buying is at least comparable to standards or regulations that they're used to.
Yeah, is it produced in a safe facility that has
Right.
certain standards in place? Can the consumer rely on what's on the package? This contains X percent or milligrams of whatever. You need to be relying on those things. Until you do, there's no such thing as branding. Consistency leads to branding. Branding leads to wider spread distribution. Wider spread distribution relies on regulations to create shelf space. And that is the thing that I caution people that are all in on CBD brands. And here's why. From a supply chain standpoint, as a waste product, it makes sense. But as a brand, why do you think you're so friggin' special, as we would say in New Jersey? What makes you so special, right? Because at the end of the day, when the FDA regs comes around, what happens? Procter & Gamble, people that own all of the shelf space in every retail outlet across this country for mainstream food and so forth and so on, if they're not already, they're producing products. They're using their shelf space. So your brand has to be a really niche brand, an athletic performance product, a product for female uses, a beautification product, a pet product, a beverage. You have to have something that's really niche and really interesting, or else the other folks are just going to steal what you're going to do, and they're going to do it faster and better because they already have facilities to do that.
Yes, and the shelf space, just like you said. And I really almost want to cut what you just said out and replay it, because without being rude, sometimes I say to people, I'm tired of hearing you're the best. Everybody's the best. It's CBD. Everybody has the best product. Just ask them. But really, what is it that makes yours the best? What sets you apart? And I think that that's key if you're going to be successful. It's
right. And right now, when I look at acquisitions for my clients, when they say, Bob, go out and find me a CBD company that sells pet products or whatever the case might be, you know what the differentiating factor oftentimes is? It's not necessarily the quality of the product, because a company with money knows that it can always improve the quality of the product with technologies that allow for body optimization, absorption, all that kind of stuff. But it's distribution. So if I go after a topical, what's my distinguishing factor between your topical and the other 10? It's who has the most distribution. That's all I'm buying, because I can make your product better than you, probably. And again, that's not to say that people aren't hustling, working hard, and developing great things. It's just to say that companies with billions of dollars of revenue and existing infrastructure and global distribution, they can just do it better. They just can.
Well, and I think this is exactly this phase of what we're seeing in the emerging market. We're starting to see a lot of M&A. I mean, this is right. Talk to me a little bit about the actual just life cycle, I guess, of the emerging markets, the emerging industry.
We're seeing a ton of consolidation. I wrote an article in Forbes recently, what I called the year of consolidation, and I talked a lot about marijuana, but it applies to the hemp industry as well. Why consolidation? Because with the specter of federal legalization coming in the Biden administration, whether that happens, I don't think it happens in 2021, although I think the banking bill passes, which starts to open that door. I think 2022 or 2023, Biden's administration, for viability in and of itself, they've got to legalize cannabis because there's just so many other challenges in this country. Something has to set them apart if they're going to go up against a presumably galvanized Republican candidate, whether that's the former president or somebody else. You're going to have to do something special. And it's not just the status quo. So that is leading people, because we saw in Canada when Trudeau became prime minister, before the law was even enacted, we heard him say he's going to change the law. That caused billions of dollars to rush into Canada. Now, the Canadian publicly traded companies largely spent it like drunken sailors on things with no assets. But at the end of the day, the principle applies. And I think people are beginning to aggregate. I want some marijuana holdings. I want some CBD holdings. I might want some agricultural holdings in the hemp industry because I want to control my own supply chain. And by the way, I would posit, and I work all over the globe, and I would suggest very strongly that hemp is the backbone of the global cannabis industry. What do I mean by that? I mean that when Pfizer produces cannabinoid-based medicine, it doesn't need to get its medicine from marijuana. It's, again, another single-purpose crop that costs a lot to produce. If I grow 1,000 acres of industrial hemp and I have 10 to 12 metric tons of biomass per acre, 0.3% of that or lower is my THC content. That is a whole lot of THC. That's 100% legal and no longer a controlled substance in the United States. What if I take my CBD isolate and I send that to a lawful country, which is a business plan we've put in place for many of our clients? You send it to Colombia, or you send it to Uruguay, or you send it to one of these European countries that have a THC program, and you turn that isolate into Delta 9 THC. You've just created the lowest cost, highest quality, pharma grade THC on the planet, and it all came from hemp. And by the way, in that scenario, it's all made in the USA, which makes it even better. So that is the backbone. We don't need marijuana is important because of its potency in the flower form and in the distillate forms. When you're talking about cannabinoids, the existing distribution system for ingredients at API, active pharmaceutical ingredient grade materials, is an isolated form that has a certain level of purity, produced in a certain manner, in a certain type of facility. You can do that with hemp all day long. And then again, you don't need marijuana to fill the Pfizer pipeline for research or cannabinoid medicine. And a lot of people don't like to hear that because they go, well, hemp doesn't have THC. I just gave you the math on the THC. And by the way, we don't need it to be THC because we can convert it to THC and then it becomes API grade THC. So my point is, hemp really will be the backbone. We're just not there yet. And it's going to unfold over the next 50 years. We're not even going to see the most exciting things in mainstream cannabinoid medicinal development, unfortunately.
Oh, I love hearing what you're saying. And I've actually heard it from a couple of other companies that are using industrial hemp for their CBD and medical production, their medical line. And so, of course, when they came to me and asked for seeds, I was just like, oh, this is great news. This is big. Yeah. But I think that the certifying of seeds says a lot. You know, history shows a lot. We don't have certified CBD seeds. We have certified industrial hemp seeds. You know, and so I think
unless you drive up to Farmer X in Southern Oregon that has people lined up around the corner, he's selling CBD seeds, but that's that's not a real person. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, my point exactly.
That we've seen that fail, and why did it fail? Because they're not produced in a standardized format where you can't rely on germination rates, you can't rely on percentage of males and females. Because there's inevitably going to be males in there, but that percentage should be very low. And you just can't rely on it not being marijuana, frankly, from a THC threshold perspective. And I'm sorry, it's not hemp farming if you harvest early just to keep it under 0.3% at harvest date. That's not hemp farming, and that's not sustainable. It might make you a few bucks now, so go get it while you can, but it's gone tomorrow.
Well, and this is where the risk comes, right? This goes back to the education, and this is the sad part and where we saw so much loss on our farmers, right? These guys that put even just 5 acres in, but 5 acres of hemp or low THC marijuana it's a lot, and it was a big loss, and some of them are, facing big charges, and so that's the part that education is again extremely important.
Well, and again, that's why things like this are so important. That's why we put out so much content. Can I ask you a question? What do you see as sort of the next big thing in industrial hemp, or what is the trend leading to? If it's the same or different than anything we've already talked about?
I think definitely plastics. I think that we're up against plastics, and then steel. We don't talk a lot about steel. When we talk about carbon production and our carbon problem, and really what is at the forefront of discussion for sustainability globally, carbon, and our steel industry is a major producer. And so where we as the hemp industry can compete is the structural space. And we're talking, trillions of dollars instead of hundreds of millions of dollars on industry opportunities. And so I think that there's a lot of R&D still, and I think that even goes back to what equipment we use to process or harvest our hemp, how it's harvested, if it's long fiber. There's a lot of education that still has to come. But Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we're building cars and able to build cars. And again, I think that without contracts, we can't, without these industries saying we're in, and pressure now is coming, down, especially in other countries, to pay attention to their carbon footprint and really truly being carbon negative. We're going to start seeing, without those contracts and companies saying, hey, we're in, we don't have a viable market for our farmers. And so I think really, when I asked earlier, how do we stop this chicken and egg? I think it really is a matter of educating these other industries that hemp is a viable solution to provide opportunity for them to maintain stability and sustainability.
Well said. No, that's really well said. I would say, despite, I don't want people that watch or listen to this to think that, I or anything, we're not against anything. If there's an opportunity, go get it. What we're trying, and by the way, there's strategies for all that. And I've certainly been there and done that. And my team, we could put strategies together all day long for no matter how aggressive you want to be. But at the end of the day, I'm talking about sustainability. I'm talking about commoditization coming down the road. I'm talking about global business. And some farmers and some people might say, I'm struggling to sell my goods in California. How can I think about a global business? And I think you have to, because you at least have to begin to have that perspective, because that's what's going to set pricing and indicate what those uses are. But, on an entertaining note, I just wanted to share one last thing before we sort of come to an end here. So I had an interesting project in Colombia. I've done a lot of work in Colombia over the last 4 years. And I was down there about a month and a half, 2 months ago. And we have a potential client, or pardon me, it was a potential client, it's a client now, who wanted us to come and help them understand how hemp can clean the soil. In other words, the bioremediation capabilities of the plant. And of course, we brought experts from university and from the private sector down, and we put together a project. Why did they want to clean the soil? Because this land had historically been used for coca production. And in Colombia, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of coca production, most of it illicit or illegal, but there is a lot of it that is legal. So under the Biden administration, they've returned to this old policy of going out and spraying poison on the coca crops. Well, they poisoned this field. It wasn't currently being used for coca, but they poisoned this field, and these fields were substantial. So these farmers wanted to know, and the owners of the property wanted to know how they could clean the soil with hemp. And we brought that. That hemp's in the ground as of about a week ago, and they're gathering a laundry list of information from people far smarter than myself on how this works and how we can identify the sequestration and the cleansing of the soil. And I know that there's a lot out there, but let's not forget that capability, because that is the easiest thing to do from what we'd call in the US a brownfields perspective, right? Of cleaning the soil. So if it's being used in Colombia to remediate poisoned coca fields, it can be used for literally anything.
I'm curious. I'd like to talk more about this. I actually started a group around this where we're going to speak about the carbon and remediation. But I'm curious then, what do we do with it? If we put it in these hot sites or these, toxic locations, and I specifically think about these oil field, all these oil fields on tribal property that really need cleaned up. What do we do with it then? If it's remediating and sucking it all in, then do you pelletize it and burn it off, or?
Well, it depends what's in it, right? It depends what levels of and that's where this data will use some of that information. What's in it, right? Some obviously you don't want it going into human beings, and you probably don't want it going into the animal food supply chain either. So can you take the herd and create, a construction material that does not sort of allow whatever's in that herd from being sequestered to enter into the atmosphere? I don't know answers to questions like that. I know there are answers to at least partially to questions like that. You got to be able to use it in a fashion that it's not releasing and affecting human beings or animals. And there are ways to do that. It's just, we've got to be real careful about that. But to your point, do you burn it off? That's certainly a viable.
And then does it go back?
Yeah, you're just releasing it back into the air. These are
questions that come up, and I bring these up a lot is because I think that as, we talk about the opportunity and then we do it and now we have this toxic plant, right? what's the next step from there? I think that's, again, the process in, understanding the business plan as you're moving forward, and that, utilizing each piece of this plan.
And go slow. And here's the other thing. So many folks that work in the industry, they want to grow 1,000 acres tomorrow, or they want to make plastic and fuel tomorrow. Those are good objectives, but you got to have your short and your medium objectives to get to that longer term objective. And not that we can't make that longer term objective accelerate, but it's still a longer term objective. So you have to, my grandfather always used to say, you can't eat a whole pizza with one bite. You got to eat one slice at a time. And ultimately, I think people are trying to fold the pizza in half and stuff the whole thing into their mouth. And that doesn't work. It doesn't work with anything, not just industrial hemp. The other thing I would say is, especially some of the sort of activist-minded folks in this industry, and we need those people. That's who got us here. Stop with a preconceived notion about what this has to be. If the plant is going to be used for its maximum versatility, the 50,000 uses, the Jack Herer notion, it has to become commercialized on a global scale. We need infrastructure. That's not something that simple farmers and a group of individuals can do together. So let's not be afraid of this. Let's embrace this and appreciate the full-blown uses of the plant on a very large scale. And the sooner we do that, stop imposing sort of, no, this was supposed to be for us and for everybody. And it can be, but commercially, especially for those 50,000 uses, which will save the planet. We know that. We already know that. It just has to happen. That's the stuff that we have to be focused on. And the fastest way to get there, unfortunately or fortunately, is the introduction of big business into industrial hemp farming.
Well, and thank you for saying that. Thank you, because I think you just nailed it. We have to take it to the next level in order to get it into everybody's hands. And in order for it to be part of everything we see, that's what we have to have. And it's funny you even say this. When I first started, I started in Utah and then went on a national scale and then now global because of that. Because I realized in order for Utah to sustain or really grow its market, we had to have more help, right? We have to be able to collaborate. And again, this goes back to collaboration and really linking arms with people that are doing it right. And so again, thank you very much for joining today. Thank you for jumping on here. I love highlighting what you're doing. I love hearing and reading your articles. We share and highlight them quite a bit. Thank you everybody else for listening. Robert, what can we do for you, or what can we do as an association to really boost this industry?
Just continue to do what you're doing, educate, spread the good word, and give people, unfortunately, a reality dose. And one last thing I would say is also we're very proud of GPS. We just finished a Utah state contract where we, Gateway Proven Strategies, our consulting firm, did in fact lead the state of Utah through all of its testing protocols for extraction. We used the state lab and we provided insight and intelligence, and so hopefully that information makes its way to the appropriate regulators so they understand how that can work for extracting things from the cannabis plant. And I'm excited to continue to see this plant grow. One last thing I think that might be interesting to highlight: hemp means different things in different parts of the country, right? What they're growing in the Northeast and what they're growing down in Florida in the Southeast is very different than what we're growing out here in the West and what we're growing in Texas and what's going to be grown in California going forward, et cetera. And that's something I don't think we talk enough about, because I've heard a farmer in North Carolina say, well, I'm buying seeds from a guy in California, to which I said, well, what makes you think those California seeds are going to perform well in North Carolina? There is a genomic map that can be applied so you can figure out what seeds will perform well in different jurisdictions. It's basic agronomic selection of genetics, and you got to start there. So anyway, that's a mouthful, but Mandi, thank you for having me. I'd love to do it again, and we'd love to have you on the Hoban Minute at some point as well.
Yeah, please. Let's continue. I'll reach out again. Let's stay in touch. And next time we're at an event, let's talk. Actually, like to see. It's always funny walking around events now, and I'm like, oh, wait, I've interviewed you. Oh, I know you. Oh, I've talked to you. So it's exciting to get back together. Anyways, enjoy your travels. Good luck to you. Thank you very much for your time.